Okay. Good morning. So, yeah, I'm at my son's football camp. But I want to record these little things because I know if I try to set it up during the actual live chat, the technology is going to screw up and it's going to be terrible. So, a couple things I want to talk about that came up in the readings, and that was the idea of free will. So I want to spend a little more time because that's a big philosophical issue. And Telepath got into it, as well as if you checked out, that the textbook that you have, A Basic Introduction to Philosophy, that's a really good book in terms of, succinctly describing and capturing the logic of a lot of different perspectives. So I know that we don't always have time, especially heavens in a 5-week course, right? But that's an introductory course like this. The point ultimately is not in 5 weeks for you to master everything and it's like now you're a philosophy expert. Not at all. Intros introduce you to the stuff. It's like a buffet, right? And it's just like a ticket to the buffet, and I say, hey, here's all these dishes, but then ultimately it's up to you to pursue what you want later on. So it's just these intro courses are meant more or less really to expose you to stuff, not necessarily like make you a resident expert. Anyway, the point, so you can always continue, studying this stuff on your own. But anyways, back to free will. So check it out. You know what? Let me change my color though. So will, or in Latin, volition, right? Volare is where it comes from. Literally it means to fly. So do you remember the tripartite soul, right? Here we have reason, emotion, appetite. Remember that? So imagine the will is like out here. And you have these influences, right? So appetite is body. So your body influences you big time, right? Like, do you ever notice how when you're hungry, it's very difficult to be, to concentrate or something like that? Or you get angry and stuff sometimes, don't you? When your blood sugar is low or whatever. And then emotion, too, obviously. We can call this, emotion. I don't know what else to call it. So, yeah, your emotions affect how you do things. Like, for instance, do you ever notice when you're angry, right, you get like tunnel vision, right? And you're like, very often when you're mad, there's only one solution to a problem, right? Because your emotions often, contract your ability to see rational alternatives. And then, of course, there's reason up here, right? So the deal is, think of will in general as something like this. We have all these influences, right? Now, some people will argue that the body influences us. Some will argue the emotions influence us. Some will argue that we are rational and therefore make our own decisions. The deal is, these all influence us, but what do we ultimately choose? So if I'm choosing, X versus Y, I don't know what to do. Do I do X or do I do Y? So the appetite will have something to say, the emotions will have something to say, reason will have something to say, but at the end of the day, it's the will that's going to connect us to one of these. So let's say I make an emotional reaction, and my emotional reaction makes me choose X. Will is what actually did the decision and executed, if that makes sense. So that's the thing about will. But there's all kinds of influences on the will. And they can be broken down basically into two general categories, which then are subdivided down. And in Telepath told you about determinism, right? Hard, determinism, soft, whatever. I just want to get the overview distinction. So free will is the idea that somehow our reason allows us to sort of elevate above our influences if we are properly trained to be rational. That's the thing. In fact, if you've ever heard the word deliberate, right, or as they say in legal profession, to deliberate, like when a jury goes to deliberate, from the Latin, this means from freedom. Deliberatus. Liberatus refers to freedom. And so when you're deliberately thinking what you're doing basically is shutting off the influences of appetite and emotion so you can be rational. Like, you ever try to do your math homework and you can't if you got ants in your pants, or if like you're giddy about something else, or if you're like hungry, or if your butt hurts, or if you're bored. So you can't be free to do your math because all of these other things are impinging on you. So the idea is, in order to truly think and be free, you got to like get outside your body, basically, because all the things that would impede your ability to be rational basically come from the body, is the way it goes. But anyways, so take a guy like Sartre with existentialism, that we'll talk about in a minute, and even a guy like Descartes. These are two guys that we're further going to discuss. But both of these guys have the impression that you make your own choices. And if you succumb to the influences, then that's on you. But at the end of the day, they both hold that you ultimately have the freedom of choice to make any decision. And, you know, a goofy example in the extreme, but one that makes sense, is it's like if someone puts a gun to your head and says, do this. Most of us would say, well, I had no choice. Well, you did, actually. You still have a choice. You have a choice between doing what they're telling you or dying, right? But that still is a free choice. It's just a lot of people don't think of it that way, right? Now, determined means that essentially you don't have any free will. And the idea there is that through fate, or let's put a few, so there's, in the old school, there's fate, but in new school, there's genetics. And there's also pharmacology. So, actually, it's a C, pharmacology. So consider this for a second. Nobody really wants to admit that they're a robot, right? Nobody wants to say to themselves, oh, I have no free will. You know, I'm just a slave to my influences, right? No one wants to say that. But take something like psychology or psychiatry. So the idea of determination, and you all know what fate is, right? Fate is, whether you like it or not, everything's mapped out for you. The only person who doesn't know what's going to happen to you is you. So therefore, you have no free will. You just don't know that you don't. That's the shtick behind fate, right? Well, I don't think a lot of people buy that anymore. However, think of something like genetics or pharmacology. So take psychiatry or psychology. The idea is, if there's a certain behavior that you don't like, you try to find a cause for it, right? And so once you find a cause, you're like, aha, so A caused B. Well, guess what? If you have a scientific cause, then in a way you didn't choose it, did you? Because there was a cause. The cause was A, right? Same with pharmacology. It's like, if there's a behavior you don't like, take this medication. And what is medication? What are drugs? Chemicals. So there's a certain chemical reaction that happens in your brain that then changes your behavior. Ergo, you don't have free will because your behaviors are dependent on brain chemistry. Do you kind of see where we're going here? So the idea is, the more we understand about how the brain works, the more ultimately we'll be like, where's my thing here? That Baron Dahlbach guy that came up in your in telepath reading, who said that there's a cause for every single one of our little actions and desires. The problem is we just don't know all of those little causes yet because we don't have enough brain science. But when we do, we will understand that, like a computer, we are all scripted. We're nothing but if-then scenarios. Some people have, neurologists have gone so far as to say something like, even love is nothing but an olfactory chemical reaction. In other words, pheromones and smell. So the reason you love your significant other, they would argue, is not because, you know, you have the freedom to love who you want and it's wonderful, but rather there's a certain smell that you're not even aware of that induces a chemical reaction, and that's all she wrote. So as we move forward into this, and how does it connect back to this stuff about ethics in the 21st century and all that? It comes a lot with technology, right? So as we move forward, we're going to kind of keep an eye on here. We're going to look at Sartre and Descartes a little bit more, and keeping in mind that the connection between the philosophy and the ethics in the 21st century part of the course lies in the fact that what do you do with privacy on the internet? How do we maintain free will? How, even consider this, Karl Marx, who we did not study in this course, father of communism, even argues that part of our determinism is our economic class, right? And there's a lot of books like, what was that one about what your zip code says about you or something? The idea is even where we are born, in what neighborhood, has a determining influence on what we end up doing and the choices we make. So anyway, how does that then affect our ability to be free online and that sort of thing? Anyway, we'll talk about that here in a bit.